just west of the river, Mississippi mud running in my veins. And on the road is where I found freedom, and hotel rooms is where I found peace. I spent my whole life running.
I want to introduce to you Stephen Harrigan, Sam Gwynne, and Justice Ken White.
Thank you all so much for coming tonight. Morris did say one thing, that I do speak all over the state, but I have never been anywhere, and I mean this, with a nicer group of people or more welcoming community than Granbury. So thank you all for having us. That's just the holder of knowledge here.
What did I say?
Sam is closest to me. Stephen's on the end, in case you haven't checked the pictures. Thank y'all for being here.
Thank you, Ken.
Y'all need to realize that we're with two legends of Texas arts and letters, and I'm as excited as anybody. I also write for a living on the Court of Appeals. The single most boring, dry, god-awful writings. I produce them by the hundreds. But these gentlemen I've read longer than they would like to know since I was fairly young, and I'm just really excited. This is a treat for me to hear how masters of their craft execute their tasks. So thank you all for doing that. I think, how did you get to Texas, Sam? I was told to ask that.
How did I get to Texas? I'm one of these guys who they say, I got here as soon as I could. I wasn't born here, but I got here as soon as I could. I was working for Time Magazine. Most of my career was spent at Time Magazine, journalistic career was spent at Time Magazine in various functions. And I was working in New York City as an editor, and completely miserable. And I went into my to a friend of mine's office who was the bureau chief. The bureau chief, or chief of correspondence, was the head of all correspondence globally. And so I walk into her office and I go, get me out of here, basically, just get me out of this place. And so she puts her feet up at her desk and she starts leafing through, and she's going, we're looking at which bureaus I might be sent to, escaping from New York. And she goes, Nairobi. How does Nairobi sound? We go, well, maybe, I say, is it Brussels? No, is that Miami? Something. We keep going through it. Eventually, she says, well, what about Houston? And I said, fine. And that was that. And I walked back, and I walked down to my office, and that was it. I said, I'm going to Houston as Houston bureau chief. As I'm walking down there, I pass a friend of mine who was Houston bureau chief for a time. The Time Magazine bureau was there because of the Johnson Space Center. Of course, that's why it's in Houston. And he says to me, hey, look, walk right back down the hall and ask Joelle if she really cares if you're in Houston or whether you could be in Austin. And so I did, and she said, no, I don't care. So I said, okay, I'm going to Austin. And that was how I got to Austin. And my first assignment was covering this sort of punk kid of the famous politician, George W. Bush, who was running for governor, given no chance at all to win. Attached to that was another trip that I took with his brother, Jeb, who was given a chance to win. And I just started covering the state as, a Time bureau chief would, covering the politics and so forth, and it got me around the state. Anyway, it got me here, and one of the things I realized later was that, it came very clear to me, was that a book like Empire of the Summer Moon is entirely the product of my moving to Texas. I would never have seen it, never have heard about it, never have felt it, never have had any idea of that book unless I had moved here, unless I had spent time particularly west of I-35. And it really, moving here changed my life completely in very many ways. It allowed me, my work at Texas Monthly allowed me to write 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9,000 word stories in Time Magazine. It was all very compressed. So I learned how to write long narrative journalism, which in effect is long narrative writing. And so it all came from that moment with my chief of correspondence with her feet up on the desk. So, all right. Very, very grateful.
We solved that problem. Steve, you're not originally from Texas, but you came as a younger man.
I was 5 when we moved to Texas. I grew up as a relative term. I grew up until the age of 5 in Oklahoma City, which is, Morris was talking about my latest novel, The Leopard is Loose, which is set in Oklahoma City. It's about a little kid who's trying to make sense of the chaos around him when a leopard escapes from the zoo, which really happened. We moved to, my mother had been widowed before I was born, so I lived in a kind of family compound with my grandparents and 4 uncles and an aunt. And my mother remarried, when I was 5, and my brother and I moved with our new father to Abilene, where I lived for until I was like 5 or 6. We lived there for 5 or 6 years, and we moved again to Corpus Christi, where I grew up the rest of my childhood. And it was a really interesting way to observe Texas. To go from Oklahoma, cross the Red River, and even at that time, you could tell the roads were better in Texas. And so in Abilene, where it was Comanche country, it was. We moved there in 1953, and it's still. And this would be familiar to anyone in Granbury or this part of Texas. There was a palpable sense of the frontier. You felt it. You were aware of it, even as a little kid. And then when we were, and it was a little, dry climate more or less. And then we moved to Corpus when I was 10. Well, yeah, I guess it was 10. And it was like moving to, it was like moving to the tropics. It felt, I was like, my parents couldn't figure out what was wrong with me because I couldn't move for like 3 months. It was the humidity. I just wasn't used to it. And I compared it to being like a lizard in a terrarium in this humid environment. But the combination of growing up with West Texas or West Central Texas, and in my sort of experience portfolio, and the coast, the Texas coast and the Gulf of Mexico, and those two polar opposites, I think gave me a sense of this state that nothing else, in my experience, could have.
Yeah. Well, when did y'all, each of you can answer this, you've been in Texas long enough, when did you start feeling like a Texan, or do you?
I can tell you the exact moment for me was when I was maybe 6 or 7, and we went to visit my grandparents in Oklahoma City, and went to the grocery store that they always shopped in, where we had been 1,000 times as kids. And the guy behind the butcher counter said, "Wow, they sure do grow them tall in Texas, don't they?" Because we had grown up like that. So I felt like, okay, I'm a Texan.
I don't know that I'll ever be a Texan. I don't know that I'm too much of a New Englander. I just, I didn't get here until I was, in my 40s.
But you got your boots on, so that's...
I do have
That's
boots
something.
on, thank you. But I really embraced it. I loved moving to Texas. I said, Katie and I thought we were in paradise. We moved to Austin in 1994. And just absolutely thought we were in paradise. We thought one of the reasons we did it was not only that Austin was just this great place to go and raise a child, we have an only child daughter here, but also that we never experienced the level of friendliness that we experienced here. Just nice people. And when you do what I do for a living, which is cold call, basically you're a journalist calling people, "Hi, Sam Gwynne from Time Magazine." "Oh great, that's just what you wanted to hear, right? Time Magazine's on the line, would like to talk to you, sir." The levels of politeness from everyone who answered the phone, the receptionist, the operator, just everybody, the dry cleaner guy, everybody, it was like, it still strikes me. I have a daughter, so I'm not a Texan. My daughter is like completely 1,000% Texan. She, this kind of idea that Texans were friendly. Maisie, when she would go to other states, would just be friendly because Texans are friendly. And girls don't really talk to boys that way, or girls aren't friendly that way. I remember she was at a camp somewhere out of state with her friend from Texas, and they were known as the crazy Texas girls, because they talked to everybody. She talked about how she, at some point, that the boys elsewhere were not courtly and not mannered. And my daughter's a hardcore, like all district athlete. She's no prairie flower. But it was like, the boys, at some point, she just decided she wasn't going to go out with anybody anymore. It wasn't from Texas because they didn't pay for dinner, and they took more time with their hair than you did, and they weren't nice, and they didn't see you, and it's like, but there was a whole, just really embraced it. But would I ever say, I'm a Texan? No, I wouldn't, but I think at this point I'm going out feet first, so.
Well, I don't know y'all Texans for sure. I want to talk about some specific books for sure as we go through this, and we'll have some time at the end for Q&A, so be thinking about that you want to ask. But I think I want to start first with, because I want to write a book, and what I've discovered is if I say, well, I'm working on a couple of books, if I just keep saying that, I never have to finish them. So, how do you write a book? Like y'all, let me rephrase the question. You come from a journalism background. What does it take to go from even a 7,000 word story to a book? I mean, what is your process?
Well, I'm sure we're different in a lot of, I know we're different in a lot of ways. I come from a journalism background, but I come from a novelistic mentality, and I wanted above anything to be a book writer and write a novel. And so I got into journalism. Unlike Sam, I got into journalism sideways. It was, I was mowing yards for a living. I thought I could do a little better. But the yard mowing was a kind of incubator for me, because I'd be there like 18 hours a day, sweating and pushing this lawnmower with lots of time to think. And I began to, I had a novel I wanted to write. A couple I had tried but failed to do. And then I decided, what if I wrote a magazine article? And I came up with an idea, and I pitched Rolling Stone magazine in like 1973. To my surprise, they wrote back and said, sure, send it in. And to my greater surprise, I wrote this thing and they paid me $150. So I was a professional writer. But what's critical to me, I think I'm answering your question in a roundabout way. What's critical to me is the synthesis between journalism and imaginative fictional writing. Because those failed novels I tried to write were about a guy sort of moping around. There was no action in them. There was nothing. They weren't about anything. They were just about me at the age of like 21 and how I didn't know anything. And what made me become a writer for real as a book writer was journalism forced me out of my personality. I'm pretty shy in general, and the idea that I would have to make a cold call, that I would have to go somewhere and talk to somebody and represent myself in a certain way as an information gatherer, that became over time part of my personality. And I had a kind of outward ability to see the world and to learn about the world. And almost every novel I've written began with a magazine article I wrote. So they just fed each other in a really interesting way. And in terms of how we do it, I think we probably do it differently, but we can talk about that. How do you do it?
Well, that's a whole different category section. Like how does one actually do the book or execute the book? But how do you get from no book to book? To me is actually maybe more similar than you think in some ways, because I came out of college. I decided I wanted to write fiction. I wanted to be a novelist. I wanted to be specifically F. Scott Fitzgerald, which would have meant bestsellers by the time I was 25, drinking champagne out of my girlfriend's shoe in Paris. That seemed like a pretty good idea. Why wouldn't that work fine? And if you didn't really all you had to do was kind of live your life to the fullest, and then get up in the morning from 9 to 12 if you weren't too badly hungover and write about it, and that seemed like a pretty good model. But when I got out of college and I started trying to write fiction, I even went as far as I got a teaching fellowship at Johns Hopkins in a prestigious program under John Barth. But my problem was I didn't know. The question is, I think all writers face this early on, is what are you writing about? What is it exactly you want to write about, Sam? Well, I don't know. And so I would try to come up with ideas for short stories or something, but there was no mandate, there was no push. I didn't know what. So what are you going to write about, Sam? So the truth was, I didn't know. I didn't have anything sitting there. I didn't have like, oh, my grandfather's death was so moved me, I want to write about that. I didn't have that. So what journalism did to me, which I fell into backwards, I mean, I got there not on a direct path, but what journalism did to me is it answered the question, what are you going to write about? Because you're going to write about whether the goddamn editor tells you to write about it. You're going to write 5 stories and they're due at 5 o'clock and they better be good, or now you're going to rewrite them. And indeed, I was rewriting them, and it was like, suddenly that's what it was. There was a thing to write about. And it could have been, I mean, I started as a business reporter at the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner, may it rest in peace. But, you know, so there's that, I think, you know, getting there was important. But the actual moment is like, but you're still looking at the wall, right? And the wall is, okay, how are you getting through? What are you going to do? You're going to take a, you know, at a job at the Hood County newspaper, or, you know, what are you going to do? How are you starting, and how are you getting through the wall? And even if you did that, and even if you did well at that, how are you getting a book? Where's the book? You know, where are you getting that? Weirdly enough, I had a strange career. I got out of college, I was a French teacher, I did the graduate thing, and then I was an international banker. My first career. Because I could not find a job in journalism, not a single one, because I was doing it just as the J School classes at Woodward Bernstein were hitting the market. And I was trying to do this, and so I became an international banker, making loans all over the world. I was in 26 countries, and I was, you know, my dad. I got the job because my dad knew somebody down there. I did well at it. I was bilingual. I spoke French, so they assigned me to North Africa, and then Switzerland and France, and then eventually Asia and the Middle East, and I had this career. But I was never cut out for it. And at some point, I realized that I wasn't going to. You know, my colleagues were going to go right by me, the MBAs and so forth. And so, you know, so I ended up leaving. And well, I won't tell you the story. My wife won a game show, and we wanted a lot of money, and so I left. Okay, well, but at some point, I'm sitting there, I'm trying to freelance articles and trying to get some journalism going, and I can't really get it going. And somebody, a friend of mine, says, "Sam, you were a banker during this time where the world went up into the biggest debt crisis in global history. Why don't you write about that? Why don't you write about that?" And so I said, nah, this one wants to write about banking. And no, you know that, though. So I wrote an article for Harper's, through the wall, bam, Harper's, 5,000 words about my banking years. Bam, got an agent, bam, got a book, through the wall. And what happened to me was, I knew what I wanted to write about. Not only did I know what I wanted to write about, I was an expert in it. I knew as much about that field as anybody at that point. I was going around the world making these loans that had all defaulted. We can go into that too later on. But it's answered the question, what is Sam going to write about? Well, this is what Sam's, and if my friend Mitchell had suggested, I never would have done it. And I got an article in Harper's book, and then I was through the wall, and that was it. The wall was behind me. I was good enough to just keep going after that. But and it turned into my first book, Selling Money, which was a gigantic bestseller with possibly 4,000 copies sold. But I was through,
pretty good today.
but I was through the wall, and that's how, you know, how you actually execute a book is a different thing. What I just wanted to answer, I chose to answer it that way, to say, you know, here's how I got through the wall. Here's how Sam figured out, one, that he shouldn't be a fiction writer because he's no good at it, and two, that journalism was a world of things that were about things. And I still, you know, I just did a story for Texas Monthly on the Cybertruck. You guys know what the Cybertruck is? It's this crazy kind of ugly Tesla truck that runs around. I just did a story about it. It was great. It was super fun. What's Sam going to write about? The Cybertruck. Anyway, whatever. That was way long-winded answers.
Okay, so y'all have different types of work between the two of you. You've got Empire of the Summer Moon, which is a history book, basically. You've got Gates of the Alamo, historical fiction. I was listening to Sam's latest book, driving up here from Houston today, so I know more about rigid airships than I've ever known in my life. How do you pick a story, and what How do you pick one? What makes it a good story, and why is Texas such a fruitful place for these great stories?
I think we need to make a distinction between how do you pick a subject for a book and how do you pick like a magazine story.
I think I was, more thinking about the books.
For me, the books reach pretty deep into my childhood, typically. My first novel was about a dolphin trainer in Port Aransas, and it arose out of a moment in my life when we were come down to Austin, to Port Aransas, on vacation, I guess. I can't remember exactly why we were there, but we went out on a boat, and a fishing boat out of Woody's boat basin there. And this was before, I'd never seen a picture of a dolphin. This is before Flipper or anything like that. And I was standing on the stern of this boat, just this bewildered little kid from Abilene. And the water was so murky that, you couldn't see like 4 inches below it. And all of a sudden, this thing came up out of the water.
Oh my God.
This rolling fin, and this sort of looked like it was right close. Looked like a tire with a fin on it. I had no idea what it was, and it instantly created a lifelong fascination for me with the ocean and what was down there, and what you couldn't see because it was so unrevealed by this murky water. And that set the template for me for this novel. And later, when I was a grown-up and working for Texas Monthly, somebody said in the office, hey, Ciarama wants a reporter to come watch them capture dolphins. I sort of raised my hand. And it was the most awful experience, because we were on this boat, and they had two boats that kind of spread a net around a pod of dolphins, and people jumped into the water and wrestled these two poor dolphins onto this boat. And I remember so vividly sitting there on the boat, looking at this poor little dolphin, tweeting in distress. She was on her way to Ciarama in Galveston. And I thought, here's a novel. How do I feel now? How would I feel if I were responsible for this rather than just a witness to it? So I embedded with a dolphin trainer for a week. I called upon all those sort of sense memories of being a little kid on the Texas coast, and the fascination I had with the murkiness of the water and the opaqueness of how you couldn't see anything, and how I wondered about what was under there, and that became that became my first novel, and that's true with most of the books I've written. They reach deep into my past, and so they've become a kind of obsession, particularly Gates of the Alamo, which was around that time. You've all seen Davy Crockett if you're old enough, King of the Wild Frontier. You've heard the song. That movie was the Harry Potter of its time. Yeah. And if you were a kid like me and you were 7 years old and saw the Alamo for the first time, saw a building, an old building for the first time, that sort of sense of mystery just tugs at you, and there's a sense of being haunted, and that morphed many years later into that novel.
So it's interesting, but just listening to you talk, really all of your work just grows right out of your life, more than anyone I know, really. I mean, even to the point where Steve was later a well-known scuba writer about scuba diving, published national articles about. This is part of growing out of the same thing, right?
Right. Uh-huh.
Same dolphin. But so much of your writing is just growing directly out of experience.
Yeah.
Mine is. I don't see mine so much that way. Mine grows out of more curiosity as to how the world works. But yours is coming right out of you.
Usually, yeah. And it's, but yeah, you bring, even if a case where you're just getting a random assignment, that becomes part of your life too. That becomes part of your experience and leads leads ultimately to other things. It can lead to a string of other articles, or it could lead to sort of a deep curiosity about something that was revealed to you while you were reporting that story.
Well, how did you pick? Let me just jump straight to Empire of the Summer Moon, because as I said, I get to speak all over the state on Texas history. I never fail to get asked if I've read Empire of the Summer Moon. Well, yeah, 6 times. What attracted you to that particular story?
Well, there's the general and the specific answer to that question. I guess one answer is that in everything that I've done in journalism or in book writing, I like to take swings at big subjects. You know, I like big picture stories. I like to write about history and things that have happened that are transformative, that are large. I wrote a biography of Stonewall Jackson. Stonewall Jackson is a transformative figure, or Quanah Parker is a transformative figure. So I'm going as famous cliche says, you know, if you go elephant. If you go, rabbit hunting, you're going to get a lot of rabbits, but that's all you're going to get. If you go elephant hunting, you might just get an elephant. And I always wanted to do that. And so to me, what that story did, first time I heard it, was it was a transformative story of a family that moved to Texas, that ended up changing the history of Texas, the history of the American frontier. I mean, if you look at the what they call the Comanche Barrier to westward movement of civilization, I mean, this is a gigantic sort of geopolitical, physical movement in the 18th and 19th century. So these are big picture stuff, and this idea that you could tell a story kind of that big, and extending to the foundations of Texas itself, because if you're telling that story, you pretty much have to tell, how did the Alamo happen? How did that happen? Well, it's linked to these other stories. The other side of it is just that the New Englanders, complete naive, like coming to Texas, having no idea about Texas history. I have no idea. I mean, I knew who the Apaches were, but the Comanches, I didn't know who they were. That idea that I just came here and thought, this is just the coolest history, and I didn't know any of it. And there was a second side, and this is something we were talking about earlier, but it was the proximity of Texas to its frontier just knocked me down. I grew up in New England. I mean, the Indians were pacified, killed with diseases, bullets, whatever, hundreds of years before I grew up there. And I even played summer ball with Wampanoag Indians. I mean, we knew they were around, but the history, the actual frontier where I was disappeared in the 17th century. I come to Texas here, and Keena McMath, who used to work at her great grandmother, was killed by Comanches in Austin. The frontier was immediate. It was right here. It wasn't a long time ago. The end of the Red River War, which was the end of the frontier, which is one of the most mythic and romantic moments in American history, is that moment when Mackenzie and the troops come down that hill, which I walked down on the side of Paladuro Canyon. It's the end. People think of the end of the frontier as something. The frontier keeps moving west toward California. No, it didn't. It jumped over everything into California and then came up against the Indian barrier and then stopped there. And eventually, we unleashed the war on the Indians. But it's the end of the frontier. The whole idea that you could do this. Anyway, I'm giving you a long-winded answer, but it was this idea of big picture history that could be reduced, in this case, to the story of a family, and I think one of the reasons for the success of that book was that I decided to alternate chapters between the nice little story of the Parker family, a little 9-year-old girl with cornflower blue eyes, and her family, these predestinarian Baptists who come and they settle way out beyond, near Navasota, way out beyond where they should have been. Alternating that with the story of Spanish and horses and Plains Indians, and then alternating chapters back and forth, which is kind of delivering the message, which is that this relatively small story of the Parker family could in effect tell the story of the American frontier. That's a little overblown, but not too Not too overblown.
That's interesting. Well, Texas is full of great characters. Some of them are here tonight. I found a buddy from Houston that came up. Won't call his name. Steve, great characters. You wrote Big Wonderful Thing, the sweeping 5-pound history of Texas.
Sweeping and 5 pound don't really go with
What? How did you pick? How did you pick what to put in and what to leave out to tell the story of Texas?
I just, I thought that I was going to spend 2 years researching, and then I was going to sit down and write the continuous narrative based on that research. What I quickly discovered was that I couldn't remember anything I read, and that I'd have to take it a chapter at a time. And I'd have to start writing before I was ready to, which is advice when you talk about how to write a book. That's one of my pieces of advice: is start before you're ready, or you'll never start.
All right. Let me write that down.
But I began to see that, based on my experience as a magazine writer for Texas Monthly, based on my experience of living in Texas for however many years at that time, 60-something years, I had lived through Texas history, and I had, or at least some of it, and I had chronicled more of it than I thought in the pages of the magazine, to the point where sometimes when I was looking for a source about a particular Texas history incident, I would look at the footnotes and it was me.
That's when you know you've made it.
Well, I guess that's a good source, but I began to see that it had to be, the book, for me to be interested in it, had to be personal. It had to be, and it had to be full of incident, of course, but it also had to be full of characters, and it had to be surprising to the reader, in a way that that sort of undercuts their expectations. So I began to think, okay, I want to write this book. I don't know anything yet about Texas history, but I remembered, somehow it flashed into my mind one day about big Tex burning down at the Texas State Fair. So I wrote this sentence: the fire started in Big Tex's left boot. And that led me...
You're off. Then you're off. 950 pages later.
That led me to the 1936 Texas Centennial, which was a gigantic 100th birthday party that Texas held for itself, in which it had more or less concluded that history was over. Texas was a thing that had happened. We, meaning at that time Anglos, had conquered it from the Spanish, from the French, from the Apaches, from the Comanches, from the Caracoas, and from Mexico, of course, and that there was a kind of sealed in amber quality to this moment. That was a great moment to reflect on, what history is and how we regard ourselves as a people or a place. And so that gave me a sense, just writing that chapter, gave me a sense of the tone of the book and how I wanted it to read and feel. And, so Big Tex was kind of a character, and then, of course, there's no end to the great characters of Texas history. I mean, once you start writing about, Sam Houston or Lyndon Johnson or whoever, once you get a little bit below the biographical information into the fact that, for instance, John Conley's younger brother, as a little baby, rolled into the family hearth and burned up. The same guy who was later shot in Dealey Plaza. And you think, oh, I don't know this guy. I don't know anything. This is really critical information. And you just keep probing till you find you find the person and what might have formed them and what you could write about that would interest you as a reader as well.
Like a lizard.
a lizard.
Know about Old Rip?
Old Rip, well, my favorite character in Texas history. Old Rip was a horny toad. And you guys are not, we're not too far from Eastland here. You probably know the story, but the Eastland County Courthouse burned down, and they had to build a new one. This is what, 1897, I can't remember exactly the date. And they were going to build a new one, and back then, which is not true now, there were horny toads all over the place. And this little kid in Eastland had a pet horny toad, and his father was, I think, may have been the county judge or something, I can't remember. But he came home one day, and people had speculated that horny toads could live a long time without food or water. So he asked his son if he could borrow his son's horny toad, and they put him in there, sealed him up in the cornerstone of the courthouse they were building. And 26 years later, as they were tearing down that courthouse to build a new one, the crowd gathered to see if Old Rip had made it. And so they finally got down to the cornerstone, and this guy lifts this little thing out that looks like a dry leaf, and supposedly it started twitching. And whether there was some sleight of hand involved, I don't know. But Old Rip became one of the most famous creatures in America. He was taken to Washington, D.C. to meet Calvin Coolidge. He was the subject of a bitter custody battle about who owned it. But one night, the son, I think, maybe the grandson of the guy who originally owned him, left him out on the porch one night when a norther came, and he perished of pneumonia. But during the pandemic, people were asking me, "I'm so bored. I can't go anywhere. I can't do anything." I said, "Get in your car, go to Eastland, Texas, go to the Eastland County Courthouse, look in the little viewing window there to see Old Rip lying in his coffin." And it's one of the most iconic images in Texas history. The coffin was custom made by a coffin maker in Abilene. It's very plush.
As is well deserved. Sam, what do you think makes Texas history so compelling? So many stories coming out of this state.
I don't know.
You've been here long enough.
I don't know. I worked at Texas Monthly as Steve did. I worked there for about 9 years, and we would have our monthly meeting, and the monthly meeting would be on a Monday in the first of the month or something, and then during the meeting we had about, I guess, 30 people in that room, and we were all required to bring 5 story ideas to the meeting. So there would be, well, if everybody did 5, which not all of us did, but if you did, it would be 150 whatever ideas, and every month. And the purpose of the meeting was the editor would kind of sort through these and would say which ones he liked, and then some people would say, well, you forgot this one, Pam Koloff has this great idea, let's do this, or whatever. But you look at these ideas every month, you could have put out 3 magazines. I mean, really. I mean, I'm sure Delaware is an interesting place, but I don't think Delaware or Iowa, whatever, could do that. It's just, I really wish I wish I had an answer as to why Texas can do that. I don't know. Sometimes I just explain everything. It's like, okay, we're so close to our frontier. We're a frontier state. We think like a frontier state. The businesses that I've covered here, you look at places like Whole Foods and Southwest Airlines and Dell Computer, they're way, way, way out on the front edge of American business practices. They're on frontiers in a way that California companies I don't think are anymore. I just think we're in just some kind of a frontier of, I don't know, ideas, of ways of thinking, of ways of committing crimes, of ways of drilling for oil, whatever it is. We're out on some. Do you have a theory about that, Steve? Well, why does Texas just generate? It's like effortlessly just have all you want. There's so much great stuff.
Well, we're 800 miles top to bottom, 800 miles, sideways, and 268,000 square miles. You got, sea coast, prairies, plains, forests, mountains. You've got the kind of trailing edge of every sort of environmental zone coming down here. And if you look at Texas on a map, you imagine it as the United States as a ship. Texas is the keel. It's like it's holding everything else up. It's a gigantic place. I mean, it's a huge state, and it was its own country for almost 10 years. And not just a country, it was a country at war. It was at war with Mexico, it was at war with Comanches, Apaches, the Kiowas, Karankawas. It was on a war footing. That was enough time, I think, for it to develop a personality of its own. Plus, it was spurned by the United States when it initially tried to join the Union. So that gave it a kind of inferiority complex mixed with a kind of bravado and militarism, or militancy, I guess, that just created this personality. And, who knows? Texas is a vastly different place, of course, than it was back then. But I think, people come here. I've told this story probably here before, but if you want to understand Texas, the place to go is Buc-ee's. Because when you walk in there, you walk into Buc-ee's and there's the gas pumps in the bathrooms, which are world class, beyond world class. But then the whole rest of the store is like Texas souvenirs. And when you think about it, if you go to New York, you go to Times Square and you go to a souvenir shop. You buy a little thing of the Empire State Building, Statue of Liberty. The people who are buying those things are not from New York. They're from out of the rest of the country. The people buying that stuff at Buc-ee's are from Texas. There's an identity trap that exists here that you want to be part of this place. It's vibrant. It's crazy. I mean, we know that, but it's alive. And friendly, like you say. And so this history is part of that, part of the Texas person's personality, but it's also, very much part of the state's personality as an entity.
And it always struck me too that, just one more note on that, getting back to what you said about the Republic, we have 10 years where Texas is broke, it's militarily punchless, it's got Mexicans on the south border who accept no quarter, famously, and Comanches who don't have a word for surrender, for whatever. There's implacable enemies on all sides, no money. This is, I think, the very best part of your Texas compendium, which is your treatment of this subject. But so you have this idea of kind of, it's reluctant self-sufficiency. We didn't really want to. We wanted to do it in the U.S., but we weren't allowed to, right? So we have to fend for ourselves, and it's tough and it's miserable, but we do. And then you come down, so when I remember when George W. ran for presidency, the national press, particularly the Eastern press, went crazy with, Texas ranks just any social human services like 48th, 49th, 47th, anything that's like, basically giving people support. And but people from the East Coast would call me and would say, God, what is this barbaric place that you live in? And I'd say, you live from New Jersey. I mean, you may wish that it's going to happen here, but I'm not really sure it is going to happen here because there's something really deep in there. It's not accidental that it happens. I mean, it may change in the future, I don't know, but I would just say, we're not going to be New Jersey. We just aren't. And whether you like that or not, or approve of it or not, the fact is it grows directly out of this Texas personality, and that you say, well, yeah, but all kinds of these people are coming from California, but it's what you say also, there's buy-in. I bought in totally. I mean, you look at what with my own life. I mean, I'm reinventing myself as a 57-year-old with Empire of the Summer Moon. That's a Texas spirit, I think. I mean, it's an innovation, renewal. I don't know. I see it that way. I don't know. Maybe if I'd gone to Delaware, I would have been even more successful.
You wouldn't have those boots.
I don't know.
I have wanted my whole life to do all my Christmas shopping at Buc-ee's. This may be that new one in Lewin, and this may.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one, yeah.
Don't underestimate the candied almonds. They're the big candied
No, they're awesome.
peppers. Yeah.
Right. One thing is always, listening to y'all for the past few minutes, you're reporters. I mean, you observe and you report and describe and find meaning. How does that, but you've both done history, so as a historian type, how does that work? How does your reporter mentality, for lack of a better word, influence you when you start to write history?
To me, it's absolutely essential and critical. I mean, I can't write about a place unless I see it. I can't, you know, I mean, I have to be there. You know, I'm sure there are plenty of great histories written by people in their offices, you know, in their studios or whatever. But to me, I mean, when I was writing Big Wonderful Thing, this book, I've got to write about the Caddos. And, well, what day is it? I'll get in my car in the morning. I can be in Nacogdoches and back by the next day, so I can see what's left of the Caddo village. More than a village, a temple complex. And I can see the ruts of the Camino Real nearby, and I can see Mission Tejas, where it was. And unless I'm there, I mean, I could write about it, but even if there's nothing to see, like Spindletop, you know, you go to Spindletop, good luck finding it even, it's hard to find. And there it is, and it's just this big empty field, basically, with a couple signs. But you stand there and you think, this changed the world, this place. You go to Dealey Plaza, you know, and you stand in the school book depository at the window next where Lee Harvey Oswald took his shots, and you think, I get it. You know, I understand how he could do this. And you go to Mission Control in Houston. I mean, all these places where the world changed, you know, and unless you see them, and really you're standing there and thinking about it and pondering what it meant, it's not real. And so that was my, you know, I don't know if that was a reporter mentality, but it was the only way I could do the book, was to be in the presence of these events I was writing.
So what do you think? I'm just curious, if you say, look at the difference between you and, let's say, a professor at the University of Oklahoma who's been looking at a particular subject for 30 years and writing monographs and things like that, versus you, reporter. I'm
ripping off that guy all the time.
Right, but you didn't get MA, you didn't get a PhD, but yeah, you didn't do that. You were publishing in periodicals and having an academic career.
Yeah.
You were doing stories for Texas Law.
Yeah, well, we're all three of us are like storytellers, I think, and that is the difference. I mean, I don't think I'm a historian. I don't, you know, I've written a book of history, a couple, but they don't feel like history books to me. I didn't feel like that way when I was writing them. I mean, I think, you know, Empire of the Sun and the Moon is a story more than a history. I mean, it's got a thesis, you know, but it's not thesis driven. I mean, it's about these people, you know, and you know, Cynthia Ann Parker and Randall McKenzie and Paula Parker. I mean, you were able to blend the kind of you know, the research stuff into a story, and that's what makes a difference. And for me as a reader, that's what I want. You know.
Well, that's what sells a book that is historic of
Right.
sort, because the academic books are essentially unreadable.
Except that they're often critical to your research. You know.
They are.
They are.
Yeah.
Although they are, as what Steve was saying, is they are often thesis driven. They're driven by ideologies at their center, that they're proving some kind of a concept. They're arguing this thing that someone hasn't argued before that will be, you know what I mean? They're advancing the concept. And as reporters, we're just out there with the phone stuck in our ear, interviewing somebody or going to a ranch or a business or somewhere and talking to people and then coming back and trying to make sense out of it. There's no overarching theory being worked here. There's no theoretical concept pushing anything. The thing that's pushing us is story.
Right.
And the thing is pushing the guy, and nothing against the professor at Oklahoma State who's been there for 30 years, but that's a different job. We're story-oriented, very engaged with the material, looking for stories, not looking for kind of, I'm losing concept, theoretical concept, ideology-driven things where what you're really trying to do is prove a thesis.
Yeah.
And we're never trying to prove a thesis, right? We don't do that. I wanted to tell a story about the Texas frontier, or if I'm dealing with the Civil War, I'm not trying to advance some concept about the war. I'm trying to tell the story of a general with bad eyes and a difficult personality who changed the war. I mean, that's my goal doesn't transcend that. And in so doing, illuminate the war so that someone reading it would understand it better. That's the goal.
Well, that's where I think y'all both do such a great job. Empire of the Summer Moon, I always think of it as, if you want to know what life in the Comanche camp was like, you do a great job of describing the horrible conditions under which they lived every day, and how hard it was. I'm getting the signal that it's getting toward question time. Morris, were you going to moderate the questions, or I can't see anybody raising their hand?
We don't have anybody there.
We're like snowblind.
Is there any light we could turn on at the back or something where we can see hands go up?
No.
We could. Oh, there we go.
I don't know that.
Wait, there's people out there.
Mr. Harrigan, my question to you is, where is the line between history and historical fiction?
Really? Did everybody hear that question?
Yeah, you should repeat it.
Yeah. What is the line between history and historical fiction? I think everyone who embarks on historical fiction, or let's say historical novels or novels based in history, has to deal with this question of like how much leeway can you take with the historical record? And let's take Larry McMurtry as an example. He gives himself as much leeway as he wants. I mean, you read Lonesome Dove and you think, wait, what? I mean, they're in Laredo, or Lonesome Dove is supposed to be Laredo, and where how are they getting from Miles City to this place? I mean, you're asking questions all the time. He doesn't care. He knows the history. He's plowing through the story the way he wants to tell it. In my case, I'm such a good Catholic boy that I feel like the history has to be as exact as I can get it. In the case of the Alamo, I was dealing with, my main characters were fictional, so okay, I can make them up. But then suddenly they're talking to Davy Crockett, and I don't know what Davy Crockett said to anybody except what's in his letters and documents and stuff. So, can I give myself permission to invent Crockett's dialogue? Yes, I can. I decided. I wrote a book called A Friend of Mr. Lincoln, which is, I wanted to write about Lincoln's early life in Springfield, Illinois, when he was a very complicated, troubled, ambitious, sometimes not that principled guy. But I couldn't find a window into him, so I decided I would make up his best friend, based on bits and pieces of what I knew of other friends of Lincoln at that time. And I just let myself do it. I can't, I think you could read that book and have a good sense of Lincoln and what Springfield, Illinois was like in the 1830s and 40s. But my main character, he didn't exist. But I gave myself permission to make him up as a way of making the story readable and human and as accurate as I can make it, given that that permission I gave myself.
Good question. Somebody over here had their hand up. You in the back, and then we'll come up here. Yes, sir.
You do some research. So where do you go to do your research?
The question is, where do we go to do research? It depends on what the subject is. Really. You mentioned Perfect Pass. I wrote a book about these two guys, Hal Mumme and Mike Leach. Mike Leach was the coach at Tech. Hal Mumme was from around this area. and they reinvented football. That book, there was absolutely, my bibliography is about 1 page long. There's nothing, it was done as 95 interviews, straight out of 95 interviews. That's where that came from. With my Civil War books, it's straight to the archives. It's all the truth is going to be found in memoirs and letters and government documents and battle reports and all of those kinds of things, because we're beyond human memory. So if we're looking at, I don't know, Robert E. Lee or Stonewall Jackson in 1864, I mean, well, Jackson was dead by then, but you're dealing with documents. So you have to go where the documents are. They're going to be in libraries, collections, museums. That is where they are. There's also just a lot of, there's a lot of secondary material. So I think somebody said there were 620 books written about biographies of Ulysses S. Grant, which is just so dreary. I mean, so
620 with the biography.
Yeah, so you're dealing. He's one of the most written about people in American history. But you have to read if you're. One of the reasons the Civil War, anyway, is such a harsh mistress in a way that, say, Comanches are not, is that you've got to read a room full of books just to go up to the starting line. You have to understand what all the secondary sources wrote. The Douglas Southall Freemans of the world and the Bruce Cattons of the world. You have to know what they wrote. So you've got to spend a year doing nothing but reading secondary sources, because you do have to know what they wrote. And then you plunge into those archives for me. So I guess that's my answer.
I think one thing that, in terms of research, and one thing that being a magazine writer or reporter has taught me, and probably you, is that you could spend 6 years of your life mastering the material on some arcane subject, or you could call the guy who knows that, and you could ask him the question, and that's often saves you a lot of time, because I mean we're not historians, we're storytellers, and we're so it's you get the information as you can. I find that it's going. When I started Big Wonderful Thing, I had a meeting. I asked a historian friend of mine to talk me through it and how to do it. He said, "You can't. There's no way in the world you could write this with primary documents, meaning letters and diaries, because there's just too much. I mean, you'd spend the rest of your life." And so I did sparingly. I did that sparingly, and I read the secondary stuff that Sam is talking about. Then I would look in the bibliographies of all those books, look for the documents, the primary stuff that I would find, where I could find something interesting about a character or some quote or something like that. It's interesting. We're both friends with Robert Caro, I think, right?
No, I never met Caro.
Oh, yeah, no.
Well, big fan, but I've never met.
Yeah. Well, anyway, he wrote this, the great Lyndon Johnson books. And, his mantra is, as you've probably heard, is turn every page. So he goes to the LBJ library, and he literally reads everything, and he interviews everybody. He goes back and interviews them, and which is why he hasn't finished that.
Right.
But it's amazing. So it's the combination of kind of keeping the story you want to tell in mind, and then strategically looking for the information and credible.
And we're in a time now where it's easier than ever to do historical research. Ancestry.com is one of the closest things to magic I've ever encountered. They have a lot of resources online, not just your family tree. There's also a website called Texas Archival Resources Online or something like that. And what that does is it's a search engine that searches all the archives for documents. So if you put in a query, Davy Crockett letters, it's going to give you everywhere in Texas every archive that will have it. So you don't have to call every university or do anything like that. And that's very helpful if you're trying to find something, because these documents are scattered all over the state. There's no one place that you're going to find them. Where would you think William Barrett Travis's diary would be? You probably think in the state archives or the Alamo, but it's at the University of Texas. So,
I once asked to see it, and they couldn't find it.
Oh, no.
But they finally located it. But that's another thing, just when you're in an archive and you're looking at William Travis's diary.
Oh, yeah, it's very
And you're holding it in your hands, and he's talking about how he had to turn back from seeing his girlfriend because the river was flooded, and I've never turned back in my life before. and you have such a vivid sense of who this person was.
Yeah.
You know.
I should add that that is one of, I mean, going into these archives, it's, I mean, you know, you call, a lot of it you're going somewhere, you're calling, they have finding aids at these things, so you can go and you can sort of start to figure out what you want to call, and you make a call, and the little librarian disappears and then comes back with a big folder and gives it to you. And in some of these libraries, like the Library of Congress, you're lucky if you get a Xerox of a Xerox of a Xerox. I mean, it's just, it's so boring. They won't let you look at anything. And then there was something in the Civil War, there was this thing called the Museum of the Confederacy, which no longer exists in Richmond. And this place was really run on a shoestring. They had no budget. They had no way to police what was coming in and out of there. They just gave you stuff in the fire, and you would just take the file and look at it. And I'm going on about this was such a cool moment of being in an archive. So at some point, I pull out this, it's a piece of blue paper. It's about this big. And at the Battle of Chancellorsville in 1863, which was considered to be Robert E. Lee's greatest victory and the South's greatest victory in the Civil War, and what made it possible was a flank march by Stonewall Jackson in darkness through the woods around the Union right flank, which turned the flank and changed the course of the war and so forth. And so there's a moment when Jackson is out, and he's about, what he's done is he's lined his, I think he has 30,000 men or something like that, and he's got them in a straight line. The Union line is here. He's got his men here in a T. They're just going to move against the Union line and destroy it. So just before that, he whips off a quick note to Lee and saying, you know, that whatever. I think it says, you know, our column is closed up and we're moving. That's all it said. And he sends it to Lee and he charges. And a day later, Jackson is dead. It's the last thing he ever wrote, and it indeed said that, and that's what I'm holding in my hand at the Museum of the Confederacy. And there's nothing around it that says that you're holding one of the most significant, you know, documents of the war. And I'm just holding it, and I went up to Teresa, who's the whatever you call archivist, and I said, Teresa, it's what I can't tell you, that changes the way you see the world. I mean, it's what you're saying. I'm holding the thing itself in my hands. Anyway, there's something about that transforms the way you think about it. And even though it necessarily shouldn't, because I knew what that said, I didn't discover it. I mean, it was famous, except that I'm holding it. You know, so
when I was working on that Lincoln book, I went to Springfield, and of course went to Lincoln's house, and yeah, there's a house, historic house, and fine. But then there was the mantelpiece with little holes in the mantel. That's where the Lincoln children hung their Christmas stockings.
Oh.
And I almost burst into tears. You know, I mean, it's so powerful to see stuff like that for real.
It really is. I agree. Anyone else? I'm sorry, I promised you for.
What I was going to ask is, he already touched on it with research. You know, as I'm reading the book, you know, the amount of research and how you put all this together, and obviously I'm assuming that I kind of have a point A and some midpoints and things I want to go to in the story, but to gather all of that and all the time, you know, and how you do that, which answering his question really kind of already what I was going to ask. It's just amazing just to see and master all of that.
the hard part is the master is finally putting it together so that you can actually write it into, you know, people ask me how much do I write every day, and I hardly ever write, because research is 2/3 of the project, so you get rid of 2/3 of the project, and then, but when you get to that point, what I do is I create a machine that is going to write this for me. And the way I do it is I read all the material through, I draw an outline that's got every single thing in the chapter in that outline, and then I plug it, then I fill it. I fill it, I put in references to everything I've got in the outline, so that when I actually sit down to write, I'm not rummaging through things. I have it. So the outline The annotated outline writes the story for me. And if the annotated outline is good, chapter is good. If the annotated outline is bad, then I got trouble.
Yeah, but what you do is that, and we had talked about this earlier, you know, you read other stuff that you kind of start to wear on you trying to go through the history of it. You guys put it together and it's enjoyable and it flows like a story and it doesn't bog you down. And that's what's great. I mean, you talk about the man.
Right, no, yeah, it is, but that is what allows the story to be a story, to me, is the outline.
They gotta do a great job.
Yeah, and that is it's like any good kind of piece of journalism. You have a, kind of a little kind of anecdotal, whatever, opening, followed by a little paragraph saying what the story is about, and points 1, 2, 3, and then write a nice kicker. I mean, it's not. I think what we do pretty well is tell stories, as Steve said. I mean, I think we know. I think we learned how to tell stories at Texas Monthly, both of us.
Yeah. And I think one key is to keep the reader interested. I think is start a chapter where they're not expecting you to start. And that and it energizes you because you know what they're expecting. And then this happened or something like that, and you can find an anecdote or something like that, just like you would do. We've learned to do with magazine articles, I think, over the years, where you just grab the reader with some interesting detail, and then you can kind of backpedal to the actual information and sort of filter that in.
That's great. Good. Yes.
So, in The Captured, Scott Zesch talks about how receptive and informative the Comanche Nation was when he traveled to Oklahoma for
I'm sorry,
research.
I can't hear you. Could you?
Yeah, Scott Zesch talked about how...
In his great book, The Captured.
Yeah, absolutely. About how informative the Comanche Nation was and receptive the nation was when he went to Oklahoma for his research. Curious if y'all had any responses or feedback from the Comanche Nation or any other nation for that matter during research or maybe after publication?
Oh yeah, lots of after publication. Yeah, lots of responses, and some critical, not critical. I had pictures of me with Quanah's granddaughters on my website. But there were who liked it. There are Comanches who don't think that white people should write the stories, should tell the stories of Indian tribes, and I respect their point of view. I don't agree with it. I think it's along the lines of some of these other points of view that you can't write about something that you're not. So a man can't write about a woman, and a black person can't write about a white person, or vice versa. Or Chinese can't write about Arabs, or this idea. I don't buy it. I mean, personally, but I think generally speaking, the reaction has been good.
I once did a big article for Texas Monthly about Comanches, and I spent a lot of time up in Fort Sill area on the Comanche reservation, and went to a peyote, all-night peyote ceremony.
Yeah, tell us about it.
Well, it was
I'm not going to sleep tonight.
There wasn't much peyote, and I was so worried that it's supposed to make you upset your stomach, and it was a very solemn ceremony. I said, what if I throw up? He said, it's okay, just walk counterclockwise. But I was fine. But it was a long, interesting night, and I also went to a sweat, for this little girl's, I think, 10th birthday party. And they had a Care Bear cake for her and everything, and they went to this sweat lodge, and that was like the longest 5 hours of it. I don't know, I'm not a good sauna person.
Well, thanks for the art. All right, one or two more. Yes.
Hi, this is for Sam, and I was wondering, what was the process like to pitch Empire to Taylor Sheridan?
Oh, I forgot to mention that. Can we talk about that?
Plans for it, yeah.
Okay, so the question is, what was the process like for me to pitch my book Empire of the Summer Moon to this guy Taylor Sheridan, who's a TV guy who does Yellowstone and various other and movies like Sicario and Hell or High Water or something. the basis of the question is I sold this recently to him and his production company, which for some reason is named Bosky Productions, as in Bosky. You guys know why that is true?
Bosky Ranch is ranch.
He's from
Is that in Bosky County?
He's from Princeton.
Yeah, he's from Princeton.
In Boston County.
Oh, I forgot about that. Okay. All right, he also owns the Four Sixes where it's going to be filmed if it ever gets made. The longest other question, so this, you know, it's nice if they make your book or article into a movie. It's nice on various levels, unless they completely screw it up and destroy it, which they often do. But, you know, my book has been under option from Warner Brothers, or was for 13 years, 14 years. And they never could quite make it, you know, and it was sort of interesting because when, as Taylor Sheridan told me this, I'm explaining this because my answer is that there's no pitch at all, and this is why I'm trying to explain it this way. I didn't pitch anything ever. So what happened was Taylor Sheridan is this young guy in Hollywood, and he reads my book back in 2010 when it came out. And he says, this is exactly what I want. I'm this total Texas horse guy. He's really into the Texas myth, and he's got Quanah's artifacts. He's this guy, right? This is what he wants. And they tell him he can't have it because he hasn't done anything yet. He's a nobody. He's got 2 properties, Sicario and Hell or High Water, which will end up being good movies, but they weren't made yet. So he's told he can't have it. Warner Brothers gets it. Now Warner Brothers locks this up and keeps renewing every year the option, you know, where they pay me money to retain the rights. And so Hollywood is so weird. It's either hair on fire or geologic. And so the years go by, and my agent, Howie, in Hollywood, my Hollywood agent, he knows that Taylor wanted this. So in 2023, HBO, which is the last company that has the option, lets it go. Doesn't renew it. First time in 14 years. Howie, who knows about this, and he knows and who remembers what Taylor wanted, like 14 seconds after that happens, it's on Taylor Sheridan's desk. The offer, he says, this is available, do you want this? 2 hours later, I'm talking to him in Bermuda, and he's pitching me. What a wonderful thing, huh? I mean, I've gone, because I expected I'm going to be on the phone with Taylor Sheridan. He's the hottest guy in Hollywood. He's got the hottest show, the most popular show in the world, which is Yellowstone, and I'm expecting to do that. No, I'm being pitched. Because he's wanted this for so long. He's very lucky. It's great. And I hope they make it. Hollywood is like that. I'm the guy who's been doing this for 14 years. Whether they'll make it or not, I don't know. But so it was in that rare position. Everything else in my life I have to pitch, but not that.
Well, I'm pitching the role of an overweight judge in Empire of the Summer Night. I need you to work that into the script.
No, but Ken, here's the thing. The last thing, when I'm on the phone with Taylor Sheridan in Bermuda, right? This is where he's pitching me, which is surreal. And he goes, well, he says, and I say, I just have one demand. I said. And he said, what's that? And I said, well, I want to be the bloated dead sodbuster after a Comanche.
I'll take what I can get.
After a Comanche raid. And he laughs and he goes, great. He says, yeah, we'll do it in post. That's what he said.
Wait, that doesn't sound right.
That's what he said. He said, we'll do it in post.
You can't film in post.
He said, we'll do it. See, he knows about movies. I know. Maybe he says, you're really the most. Anyway, here's hoping. Who knows? It would be fun. He intends to do 4 2-hour episodes. The model is Lonesome Dove. 1 season. He told me $300 million. That's what he told me.
I sent him an article on the Indian trial in Jacksboro, and I hadn't heard back. Somebody had their hand up here, and then we need to go to the reception. Is that right? Okay.
My question's for all 3 of you. In your opinions, if you had to choose one novel to be the pinnacle of Texas storytelling, just what that would be.
Oh, Lonesome Dove.
Yeah, we'll start Lonesome Dove and the rest of them.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any doubt that Lonesome Dove is, it's by far the best-selling novel ever written about Texas, and the most beloved too.
Although I'm a Dan Jenkins fan too.
Yeah.
Not quite at least.
I would put Gates of the Alamo top 5.
All right, can we have one more? Yes, sir.
Monday morning, and you're with your editor, and you have a pitch, an idea. What's an idea that you would enjoy writing about, that you would pitch to your editor?
Today, right this moment.
Did Billy the Kid really end up in Ico?
That was this afternoon's project.
That's pretty interesting. I mean, there's so many. I mean, we were talking, I'm sorry, is it Horace, who's the chuck wagon master? Homer Robertson. What a great story. You know,
Yeah, that's
chuck wagon,
we could pitch
catering and contest.
We could pitch it.
Yeah, and yeah, that's a great story. I mean, you're the same. You know, everywhere you go, there's a story. You know, and you just have to keep your antennae up.
Yeah, I would say Arch Manning, cover story, Texas Monthly, September of next year. Who wouldn't want to read that story? I've got access to all those people. I can pull it off. That's what I'm pitching.
I've done the definitive research on the fact that there were no beans in the first chili that was sold. I confirmed that. Are you closing us out? Thank you guys so much.
Hey, thank you, Ken. Thank you.